Picture this. It's the year 476 AD. The Roman Empire, the most powerful civilization the world has ever seen, is collapsing. But not from barbarian invasions, not from plagues. Not from some spectacular military defeat. It's collapsing from something far more mundane, almost embarrassingly simple. They ran out of money. Now, let's fast forward about 1,000 years to 1557. Spain is the richest nation on earth, literally swimming in gold and silver plundered from the Americas. And yet, they declare bankruptcy. Not just once. They do it again in 1560, again in 1575, and again in 1596. The country that coined the phrase "the empire on which the sun never sets" couldn't even pay its bills. How about something a little more recent? In 1971, the United States, the wealthiest superpower in human history, did something unprecedented. They completely abandoned the gold standard. In doing so, they essentially admitted to the world that they could no longer honor their most fundamental financial promise: to redeem their currency for gold. Here is the uncomfortable truth nobody likes to talk about. Every single civilization in human history has eventually gone broke. Every single one. The Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Ottomans, the British ... all of them. Their stories are different, but the final chapter is eerily similar. And today, we're going to figure out why. Because here's what's truly crazy: they all went bankrupt for basically the same reasons. It's like there's some kind of cosmic pattern, an unavoidable curse that haunts every empire, every kingdom, every superpower. And spoiler alert, we might be watching it happen again, right now, in real time. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into one of history's most fascinating and urgent mysteries. Why does every civilization, no matter how powerful, eventually run out of money? The first piece of the puzzle is something called imperial overstretch. It sounds complicated, but it's pretty simple. Imagine you're building a massive sandcastle. At first, it's easy. But as it gets bigger and bigger, you have to run farther and farther to get wet sand and defend it from the tide. Eventually, you're spending all your energy just maintaining what you've already built, with no energy left to expand or even fix the cracks. That's imperial overstretch. Rome, for example, grew so vast it needed a colossal army and a sprawling bureaucracy just to keep things from falling apart. The cost of paying legions to guard thousands of miles of frontier, building roads to supply them, and paying administrators to tax everyone became astronomical. The empire's expenses began to consistently outstrip its income. Spain faced the same problem. They were trying to manage a global empire, fight wars on multiple continents, and maintain a massive navy. All that gold from the New World? It flowed right through Spain's hands and into the pockets of German and Italian bankers who were financing their wars. They were asset-rich but cash-poor. The second ingredient in this recipe for disaster is currency debasement. This is the ancient version of printing money. When a government can't raise enough money through taxes, it starts looking for shortcuts. For the Romans, this meant reducing the amount of precious metal in their coins. A denarius in the early empire was almost pure silver. By the late empire, it was mostly bronze with a thin silver coating. People weren't stupid. They knew the money was worth less, so they demanded more of it for their goods and services. This is inflation, and it's a silent killer of economies. It erodes savings, destabilizes prices, and destroys public trust in the government. The government gets a short-term fix, but in the long run it poisons the entire economic system. And that brings us to the third and perhaps most important factor: debt. Unmanageable, crippling debt. Every empire that has collapsed was drowning in it. When an empire's expenses from war and bureaucracy consistently exceed its tax revenues, it has to borrow money. At first, lenders are happy to oblige. But as the debt piles up, they start getting nervous. They demand higher interest rates, which makes the debt even harder to pay back. This creates a death spiral. The government has to spend more and more of its income just servicing the interest on its debt, leaving less for everything else like maintaining infrastructure, paying soldiers, or providing basic services. Eventually, you reach a point of no return. The government defaults, like Spain did multiple times, or inflates the currency into oblivion, like Rome did. Either way, the result is the same: financial collapse, social chaos, and the end of an era. So we have imperial overstretch, currency debasement, and suffocating debt. This three-headed monster has brought down every great power in history. The scary part is looking around today and seeing the same patterns emerging. Massive military spending, ballooning national debts, and central banks creating trillions of dollars out of thin air. It makes you wonder, are we just repeating the same mistakes? Is our civilization immune to the same forces that brought down Rome, Spain, and the British Empire? History offers a clear and frankly unsettling warning. The lessons are there, written in the ruins of empires. The real question is whether we're willing to learn from them. Have you ever wondered why great empires fall? From the Romans to the Soviets, it seems like there's an invisible script they all follow. When historians and economists looked back, they found a startling pattern, and it's a warning for all of us. It always starts with a golden age. A civilization rises to power through innovation, conquest, or both. They have resources, momentum, and most importantly, hope. People believe in the system. The economy is booming. Everything seems unstoppable. Take Rome at its peak. It controlled a vast territory, had the strongest military, and an economy that was the envy of the world. Roman coins were like the US dollar of their time, accepted everywhere. But here's the twist. Success creates its own problems. Big ones. As Rome grew, so did its expenses. More land meant more soldiers to pay. More soldiers meant more infrastructure to build. All of this required a massive administration, and those administrators needed palaces, servants, and hefty salaries. Soon, the government was spending way more than it was taking in. Sound familiar? When a government gets into this situation, it has three choices. 1. Cut spending. 2. Raise taxes. Or 3. Print more money. Guess which one they almost always pick? That's right, option 3. Why? Because cutting spending makes powerful people angry, and raising taxes makes everyone angry. Printing money seems like a magical solution. Free cash, no angry mobs. What could possibly go wrong? Well, as it turns out, everything. Let me tell you about one of the most insane economic decisions in history. Around 64 AD, the Roman Empire was running low on silver. Their main coin, the denarius, was supposed to be pure silver. But Emperor Nero had a brilliant idea. What if we just mix a little copper in? No one will notice, right? At first, it was just a tiny amount. The coins looked the same, and suddenly, Rome had more silver to fund its ambitions. Problem solved. Except it wasn't. It was just delayed. Fast forward a couple of hundred years, and that silver coin was 95% copper. It was basically a copper coin with a silver spray tan. The result? Hyperinflation. Prices went through the roof. A measure of wheat that once cost half a denarius now cost thousands. Soldiers started refusing their coin-based pay, demanding land or goods instead. The entire economy crumbled. What's crazy is that they knew what they were doing. Roman administrators weren't stupid. They understood debasing the currency caused inflation, but they were trapped. It was a choice between a slow death and a quick one. This exact same story played out in China during the Yuan dynasty. They invented paper money, a genius idea at the time. It worked beautifully until the government needed more money for wars and disaster relief, so they just printed more and more. And more. By the 1350s, the money was worthless. The financial system collapsed, and the dynasty fell. Each time, the civilization believes it's different. They think, sure, it happened to them, but we're smarter now. We have better technology. Spoiler alert. They're not. But currency problems are just a symptom of a much deeper disease. It's what I call the complexity catastrophe. This is the key. When a civilization starts, things are simple. Decisions get made quickly. The system is lean. But as it succeeds, complexity explodes. You create a department for roads, then a department for road maintenance, then another department to coordinate the first two. Before you know it, you have a bloated bureaucracy where everyone has their own agenda. The anthropologist Joseph Tainter discovered that while societies add complexity to solve problems, there's a point of diminishing returns. The Byzantine Empire in its final days is a perfect example. The empire had shrunk to just the city of Constantinople, but its government was bigger than ever. They had offices for provinces they hadn't controlled in 200 years. The cost of this bloated system was suffocating the dying economy. This creates a death spiral. To solve money problems, they hire more tax collectors. Those collectors need salaries, so taxes go up. Higher taxes crush the economy, so they hire even more administrators to squeeze the people harder. It's a vicious cycle. The Soviet Union is a modern example. By the 1980s, it was one giant administrative machine. One factory manager reported spending 80% of his time just filling out forms. The system had become its own worst enemy. So the lesson from history is clear. The path to collapse isn't just about bad leaders or invading armies. It's about a slow, creeping rot from within, fueled by easy money and runaway complexity. It's a pattern that has repeated for millennia, and one we should all be paying very close attention to. Okay, so we've talked about currency problems and administrative bloat. But there's a third piece to this puzzle, and it's probably the biggest money drain of all: military spending. Here's the brutal truth. The same military strength that makes a civilization great is often the very thing that bankrupts it. Think about it. Rome conquered the Mediterranean because they had the best army. But maintaining that army across thousands of miles of territory? That is expensive. Really expensive. At Rome's peak, they had about 450,000 soldiers. Each one needed equipment, training, food, and pay, and that's not all. You also need roads to move them, forts to house them, and a massive supply chain to feed them. Historians estimate that at its height, Rome spent about 70% of its entire budget on the military. 70%. That might sound sustainable during peacetime, but here's the problem. Empires don't stay at peace. There's always a border conflict, always a rebellion, always some new threat on the frontier. And each new threat requires a military response, which costs money. This requires either raising taxes or devaluing the currency, both of which weaken the economy. A weaker economy makes the empire more vulnerable, which creates more threats. And around we go in a death spiral. The Spanish Empire learned this lesson the hard way. In the 1500s, Spain controlled a massive global empire, with silver mines in the Americas pumping out unimaginable wealth. They should have been set for centuries. But they were constantly at war. War in the Netherlands, war with England, war with France, war with the Ottoman Empire. Wars upon wars upon wars. Despite having literal mountains of silver, Spain declared bankruptcy 4 times between 57 and 1647. 4 times? The military costs were so massive that even unlimited silver couldn't keep up. Historian Paul Kennedy noted that Spain spent over 75% of its revenue on the military during this period, and here's the crazy part: they couldn't stop. Once you've built a massive military empire, you're locked in. If you cut military spending, your enemies smell weakness and attack. But if you maintain it, you bleed money until you collapse from within. It's a trap with no good escape. The British Empire faced the same dilemma in the 20th century. After World War II, Britain was broke. The war had cost them everything. Their cities were bombed, their economy was shattered, and they had massive debts to the United States. But they still had an empire to run. Maintaining that global presence was bankrupting them, but giving it up meant admitting they were no longer a superpower. So they tried to do both: keep the empire, but on a budget. It didn't work. By the 1950s and 60s, they were forced to give up colony after colony, not because they wanted to, but because they literally couldn't afford to keep them. The money ran out, and the empire followed. So this is where we get to the really scary part, the point of no return. There rests a moment in every civilization's decline where things shift from "we can fix this" to "it's already too late." And the terrifying thing is, nobody realizes it's happening until it's already happened. Let me explain. When a civilization first gets into financial trouble, the initial response is usually smart. Cut some expenses here, raise some revenue there, basic crisis management. But as the problems get worse, the solutions get more desperate. And desperate solutions tend to make things worse. Here's a perfect example. In the 3rd century, the Roman Empire was in a deep financial crisis. They needed money fast. So, Emperor Caracalla came up with what seemed like a brilliant solution. Just make everyone in the empire a citizen. Why? Because Roman citizens paid more taxes. Overnight, they massively expanded the tax base. Problem solved, right? Wrong. What actually happened is they flooded citizenship with millions of new people, which devalued what it meant to be a citizen. It overwhelmed the administrative system, and most importantly, it didn't really increase revenue that much because the newly minted citizens were mostly poor and couldn't pay high taxes anyway. It was a short-term patch that caused long-term damage. And this is what happens when civilizations pass the point of no return. Every solution creates more problems. Every patch makes the underlying disease worse. The Aztec Empire had a similar moment. By the early 1500s, their economy was heavily dependent on tribute from conquered peoples. But they'd conquered pretty much everyone nearby, and those peoples were getting restless. So they needed more tribute to pay for more soldiers to keep everyone in line. But to get more tribute, they needed to conquer more people. But they couldn't conquer more people without more soldiers. And they couldn't afford more soldiers without more tribute. They were trapped. When the Spanish arrived in 1519, the Aztec Empire was already teetering. The Spanish just pushed over something that was already falling. And here's what's truly unsettling. The point of no return isn't obvious when you're reliving through it. The Roman emperors who devalued the currency didn't think they were destroying Rome. They thought they were saving it. Everyone who has ever run a civilization into the ground thought they were doing the right thing at the time. France before the French Revolution is another perfect case study. By 1789, the French government was spending 50% of its entire budget just on interest payments for past debts. 50% just on interest. They were borrowing money to pay interest on money they'd already borrowed. At that point, there's no way out. You can't tax your way out, you can't grow your way out, and you can't cut your way out. You're just stuck, waiting for the inevitable. And when the revolution came, it wasn't subtle. It was a violent, chaotic collapse. Because that's what happens when you pass the point of no return. The system doesn't gradually improve. It collapses and gets rebuilt from scratch. Now here's the uncomfortable part. This isn't just ancient history. This pattern is happening right now, all around us. Let's talk numbers. The United States national debt is over $35 trillion. That's trillion with a T. If you spent $1 million every single day since Jesus was born, you still wouldn't have spent $35 trillion yet. Not even close. And it's growing by about $1 trillion every few months. Not because of an emergency, just normal spending. Japan's debt is more than twice the size of their entire economy. Greece had a massive debt crisis. Venezuela's money became so worthless that people started weighing it instead of counting it. Now, I know what you're thinking. But we're different now. We have modern economics. We have computers and experts. You're right. We are different. But we're making the exact same mistakes, just with fancier tools. Remember how Rome mixed copper into silver coins? We do the same thing now. We call it quantitative easing. The government creates money out of nowhere. It sounds more sophisticated, but the result is the same. More money, same amount of stuff, prices go up. During the pandemic, the US created more new money in 2 years than in the previous 200 years combined. The results? We're living through them. Housing costs up. Food costs up. Everything is more expensive. Remember administrative bloat? Go look at any government agency today. The Department of Defense has more people doing paperwork than fighting. Hospitals have more administrators than doctors. Remember military spending? The US spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. And just like Rome and Britain, there's no easy way to cut it without looking weak. I'm not saying everything's about to collapse tomorrow. But the pattern is there, it's visible, and it's getting worse. A historian named Ray Dalio studied the rise and fall of empires for decades. He found a clear cycle. Countries rise through innovation, peak through dominance, then decline through debt and internal problems. He says we're currently in the late stages of that cycle. Not at the end yet, but definitely in the late stages. So, after hearing about all these empires that have come and gone, you're probably asking yourself, is there any way out of this? Can a society actually escape this cycle of boom and bust? The honest answer? It's incredibly difficult. Think of it like trying to turn a massive cruise ship with a tiny rudder. It's not impossible, but it takes immense effort and foresight. The absolute key is recognizing the pattern before you're already caught in the storm. You need to see the iceberg on the horizon, not when you're scraping against it. This requires a special kind of leaders who are willing to make decisions that might not win them any popularity contests. Decisions that prioritize the long-term health of the nation over short-term political gains. And it's not just about the leaders. It requires a population that understands and is willing to accept some temporary discomfort for the sake of future stability. It is like a person choosing to save for retirement instead of splurging on a fancy vacation every year. The real challenge is that you have to act before the crisis hits, not during it. Once the panic sets in, rational decision-making goes out the window. Now don't get me wrong, it has been done. A few societies have managed to pull themselves back from the brink. Take the Dutch Republic in the 17th century. They faced enormous debt and reformed their finances, setting the stage for their golden age. Look at Sweden in the 1990s. They stared down a massive banking crisis and implemented tough, sweeping reforms that stabilized their economy for decades. Or South Korea after the 1997 Asian financial crisis. They undertook painful restructuring and emerged stronger than ever. But here's the thing, these are the exceptions, not the rule. They are the rare few who succeeded. And they all shared one crucial ingredient: the courage to change course before the ship completely sank. They saw the writing on the wall and decided to act, even when it was hard. And that brings me to the core idea I want you to take away from this. The collapse of great powers isn't some mystical event. It's not a matter of bad luck or cosmic fate. It's a pattern. A predictable, almost mechanical pattern that kicks in when a society consistently spends more than it earns, accumulates debt it can't manage, and then refuses to make the tough choices to fix the problem. It's a story as old as money itself. The crazy part is, every civilization, every empire, every nation thinks they're the special one. They think, oh, that won't happen to us, we're different. We've got modern technology, we've got brilliant economists. We've figured it out, but the historical pattern doesn't care about our feelings or our sense of exceptionalism. It just keeps on repeating, like a song stuck on a loop. And numbers don't lie. So the real question for us today is if modern countries will face their own financial reckonings. History suggests that's almost a certainty. The real multi-trillion-dollar question is whether we will have the wisdom to see it coming in time, and the courage to actually do something about it. Or will we end up like those late-stage Byzantine bureaucrats, meticulously managing the paperwork for provinces that had been lost for decades, pretending everything is fine right up until the very moment the walls come crashing down around us? As the saying goes, history doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly does rhyme. And if you listen closely right now, you can hear a rhythm that sounds awfully familiar. Thanks for sticking with me through that. If this video gave you something to think about, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We dive into these uncomfortable but essential truths about history, money, and the patterns shaping our future every single week. I'd love to know what you think. Drop a comment below. Do you believe we can break the cycle, or are we destined to repeat the same old mistakes? I'll see you in the comments and in the next one.